Hey guys, Detective Fail here. Hope you're doing well. Back with another review. This time with Signalis. Let's get started. In a tweet by Yuri Stern, one of the developers of the two-man team Rose Engine, along with Barbara Whitman of Signalis, he remarks how, "I wish people would be more open to letting others figure out for themselves how their ending made them feel, instead of telling a streamer, 'You got the best ending.'" Maybe you can ask, did you think this was an interesting conclusion, and they can decide if they like it or not. His comment was in response to how some players classify conclusions as absolutes for true, bad, good, etc. Stern's answer caught my attention, and I admit throughout my time playing games with multiple outcomes in the finale, I realize I am guilty of this too, and yet this establishes a thought-provoking notion to provide clarification, evidence, and reasoning beyond simple claims. Player interpretation differs for each individual. Classified as neither good, bad, or in between, it simply is. Consensus can say comparable beginnings, middle, and end, and yet we conjure causes to describe something that can be difficult or perhaps easy to comprehend. In my attempt to understand everything throughout my playthrough, I've come to see it as a Lovecraftian sci-fi blended with survival horror. Reputable individuals have noted inspiration, references, and homages to King in Yellow by Robert W. Chambers, The Festival by H.P. Lovecraft, Evangelion by Hideaki Anno, Stanley Kubrick, Resident Evil and Silent Hill franchise et al. To me, include Nier and Prey 2017 with a dash of Studio Shaft's techniques, and while I haven't read, watched, played some of those homages they hearken to, a considerable amount of careful effort to not create a reference-filled fiesta akin to Ready Player One. Plenty of satisfying content and unique properties, enough to stand on its own. You control Elster, redacted, in search of someone important to her. This is her journey after her ship crashes onto an unknown planet. She doesn't start with much, but a sufficient tutorial resides to grant a fighting chance. Make no mistake, this isn't a game where you run away consistently. You can fight back from a top-down 2.5D perspective. Lengthwise, the game took me over 9 hours to complete, and I didn't have any major, minor bugs or crashes. Ran smoothly notwithstanding looking akin to a PlayStation 1 game, an aesthetic remarkably familiar to our past of CRTs, floppy disk, and VCRs with unfamiliar technology. Retrotech meets dystopian surrealism, an unforgiving world which I became horrified to learn about and lost myself in admiring the art. The color red is used prominently, like in similar games, Scarlet Nexus and Astral Chain for blue, yet it doesn't detract from the overall presentation, a pleasant strength tied to supplementary elements the game displays to the player. The retro style succeeds in its favor since you'll be walking, running, and fighting through broken old corridors, sometimes in derelict space stations and facilities. The soundtrack has some nice tunes, but you're usually dealing with silence or at the very least oppressive atmosphere that can be ethereal. Some tracks lend to an ambience with static to varying degrees of echoes of various sounds you wouldn't expect, like crashing waves, slow piano tracks, and even a smidge of synth. Oddly enough, an inconsistent, consistent rhythm and tempo permeates. Some may find grating to hear and will switch into the opposite range and become somehow relaxing to listen. The dual nature of melancholic and comforting generates an intriguing dichotomy. Ultimately, the soundtrack is decent, though I wish for more variety to bring life to moment-to-moment scenes. Granted, I think this was a deliberate decision by the composers 1000 Eyes and Cicada Sirens to construct a suffocating pressure to incite space hell, and I can't help but begrudgingly praise the decision to do so. It works. The combat felt very tight, responsive, and didn't suffocate me constantly. For several moments I would have despaired, but a handy walkthrough and some tips kept my spirits up. One could even take advantage of Steam's new note-taking feature to remember critical material. Accessible during in-game and when you exit, so you don't always have to keep the program on. Combat when shooting could have been tweaked a little to make it more accurate, considering how the enemy's artificial intelligence acts and how we can't be experts in shooting shots 100% of the time. I can forgive this slight, certainly not a deal breaker, but make sure to watch out for your ammo, aim well, and trust in your gut the bullets will fly through. Healing is painless and not complicated, intermittent yet equitable drops of supplies to recuperate so you're not left struggling if you carefully check your stock and surroundings. Heck, you can even combine components to make weapons, use different ammo, healing, and key items to save slots, since you only have 6 in your inventory to hold. Aiming isn't even the main bread and butter. Melee weaponry serves as an acceptable tool to fight baddies. You can attain a stun rod to down enemies, then kick them to unconsciousness and push them freely when you need to gain some distance. Hell, you can even burn them when they fall, cause boy oh boy, these nightmarish creatures, I'll spare you the imagery, can stand up once more. Thankfully, they don't return to life, or should I say unlife, within a short amount of time. Probably a decent length passes before you realize your foe is ready for round 2. Outside of combat, I found world building to be richly rewarding and added substance to the environmental storytelling. I was craving to know more about the inhabitants, the government, the leaders, technology, etc. So much depth and breadth in going the full 9 yards, where I know about the whole history of nations, the background of citizens and military soldiers of a strict hierarchy during a tumultuous time. Missions and roles for each redacted unit and even enemies are spared no expense in displaying how they came to be. A Chekhov's gun tickles nearly every reach imaginable and in effect shines so hard even in the darkest of moments. I constantly read countless lore notes in the form of classified documents, redacted information, diaries, and even propaganda posters. No shortage of information, almost to the point of overload. However, Barbara and Yuri have emerged with a balanced tightrope to not overgorge the player while not slipping morsels of info. Proportionally to induce a sense of curiosity to know more, nagging at the far reaches of your brain to check every room for more data to consume. One cool feature in the form of an archive in the menu you can access anytime. No need to backtrack to the origin of the papers, thereby making recollections of pertinent details at the press of a button, straightforward. Puzzles are solid, used to great effect to tie into the lore whenever possible. Some examples are lockpicking, numerical password combinations, structural obstacles that could hinder your progression, so retracing your steps for an important piece is advisable to progress. There are extras, but I'll refrain from listing them, best as a surprise. I found the inclusion of them to be welcoming. Didn't overstay while having plentiful time for me to seek answers and clues. Some solutions are more obscure than the rest, though for the most part, all of them I felt were fitting, and the hints satisfactory to figure out the solution. Careful precision to not go rage-inducing while not making it too easy for newcomers and veterans. Remember, it's okay to fail some puzzles and return with a clearer mind. Likeable NPCs. They're personable, relatable, and offer intriguing perspectives during my playthrough. They complement Elster by acting as foils. with their objectives at large and didn't detract at all from their sheer presence. I was content. I am not alone all the time, knowing comrades are nearby who are bravely keeping on despite the horrific nightmares, and even more where I'll refrain from stating, but suffice it to say, I was sad to see. A dangerous atmosphere prevails and the mood can become bleak in the blink of an eye. Not to the extent that I became leery. While it may seem dangerous due to the unnatural air and presence, these NPCs helped me on my journey, and for that I am grateful for their company but also their dialogue. Conversations revealed vital pieces to tying what happened on the planet and what threads they could link to the plot. The horror elements are not, at least to me, horrific to the point I was disgusted or vomitable. Didn't see any major jump scares to remove my soul from my body, and I am incredibly grateful this didn't occur. Constant jump scares can cheapen the experience if not done well, in my opinion. Again, balance is integral, and the devs have managed to produce a nice gameplay loop of exploration, scavenging, combat, reading lore, drip feeding you cutscenes, and solving puzzles to be as painless as possible, while still creating enough difficulty for a challenge. Speaking of the story, I'm a bit mixed on, and this isn't to say it is a bad thing at all. Think of my mixed feelings as neither a positive or nor a negative, but food for thought. I'll outline. I felt the execution was fragmented. It's not clear what is shown to be definitive or literal to assert a conclusion on which I can base my facts and evidence. This may sound confusing and I apologize if I'm not making any sense. To clarify, you have to build the narrative, so to speak. This is fine in theory and there is a thread to follow, but sometimes the writing can be somewhat obscure along with puzzling. This pains me greatly since I couldn't get enough of the world building. In the end, I was left with the on the execution. Certainly games like the Soul series are similar in environmental storytelling, not so much on the beats of the plot to bridge together, but the world itself you piece towards to understand in your eyes what the story could be. I wish the inventory limit of 6 expanded as you progress further, like up to 8. I didn't find it too troublesome to turn back to my storage chest to unload my stuff, yet this exhibits a constant chore since I want to collect everything in nooks and crannies only for me to check the nearest save room to remove them. This isn't a big deal, I could just run past enemies, right? True, Elster does have the capability. The issue is when I am running, some enemies will come alive to attack after I already defeated them, making traversal to new areas a slightly tedious manner to do, since I must retreat and precious supplies may be utilized. This is exacerbated when I have to redo this method again when I need more space for key objects to progress. A solution I was ruminating is having separate slots for crucial items, like say a flashlight or a gun, as accessories. Lore papers could have been more definitive, as vague as I could put it. In doing so, the given knowledge would become stronger to grasp. Some notes are clear-cut to comprehend, but these ties could have been linked to creating a tighter cohesion in interpreting the plot. We are given an ample amount of lore to draw our conclusions. This is fine in theory, and I've seen examples amongst my peers that resonated more with them, so the execution worked. For me, however, I'm stuck in the middle of a hallway facing a door of greatness, and behind me a door says not greatness. I wonder if the devs could have made some threads easier to digest and distinguish, an alternative drip to gently feed the player. Admittedly, this is my personal preference and should not be taken as a common critique of the game. Individuals aside from me have rated the game highly, which is fair, and I have seen the inverse side too, so where do I land? In between those spectrums, sadly enough, there is a solid vision the two-man development studio established, and they walk a tightrope in balancing narrative ties through the gameplay cutscenes with Red Chekhov's gun to use every tie imaginable to draw players, and I can say it prevails with some stumbles. I'm not sure if this is a method of drawing everyone to understand completely what the developers try to impart by the time the end credits roll. Nonetheless, I am unsure if this is a title that could vibe with you until a session of play, and in that respect, makes this incredibly challenging to quantify against the entirety of what the game offers. Speaking of the ending, and again no spoiler territory, I think easier alternatives were possible to attempt other outcomes. I got one of them, and after checking out the rest I couldn't help but conclude the requirements are obscure for players to know. I had to research guides and see how technical the wire can run. Won't delve into the exact details, but suffice it to say, I surmise avenues are within reach, making the process less burdensome if the devs were to patch it, though I doubt they would. Whether or not newcomers know multiple resolutions. Before I forget, please go on YouTube for the rest if you were unsatisfied with the one you got. Just a gentle reminder, one of them is so convoluted the community cooperated to discover the hidden requirements. SSZZ127 from the Signalis subreddit was the first to discover clues leading to it as far as I know. I'm sad to report how strenuous it is to depict my proper feelings in describing how much the title appeals to me, against the concerns I stated earlier. A variable slow burn that may catch those who don't mind it, others may find it not as resonating. Besides the regular praise, I see fellow reviewers and fellow peers of mine who call it a masterpiece, a return to modern survival horror, and one to watch out for, and more. It's wonderful seeing high acclaim regarding the game in their manner, and I find gratifying content is an enjoyable affair, equally as those who offer a differing perspective from the norm with evidence. I am at a crossroads where I'm not sure to discern if it's a must-play for fans of the genre due to my lacking experience in the department. I've only played Metro 2033, the Evil Within series, Bloodborne, Omori, etc. So I'm not an expert. If this can appeal to a newcomer, one could even take advantage of Steam's 2-hour refund policy to see if it appeals to you, and if it doesn't, no shame in refunding. For me, I was hooked after the first hour. And so, my final score for Signalis, I'm gonna give it a tentative 7.7 out of 10. I believe Signalis may provide newcomers with a unique mileage that may vary experience and value, for horror fans and for those who are not used to it like me. I love the world building and how retro tech merges wonderfully with the dystopian sci-fi era. The lifeless music at various points forged an almost oppressive atmosphere that is both melancholy and comforting. The combat is balanced to the extent that I wasn't quite a female Rambo, but someone like Ellen Ripley from Aliens and Lilu from Fifth Element. Elster perseveres despite adversity, has no crazy powers nor impressive intellect to bedazzle us at every turn. She simply is a redacted. And I like that. Gameplay elements like puzzle solving were fun and tied nicely with the environmental storytelling. Terror aspects turned out to be not too scary or overdone in a manner I found tiresome to see. A genuine effort by Rose Engine to keep them challenging and fair in such a way I still endeavored to keep going. Regardless of my struggles and food for thought, a cool hidden gem exists. Moreover, I echo what Stern posits about not classifying endings as absolutes, and asking yourself how the game made you feel and why. Whether at the end of your journey you conceive some semblance to share beyond the scope of classifying it in categories, then by all means, please do so. Your voice is appreciated. There is beauty to find out if your experience left you something meaningful or not. Anyway, that's enough for me. Thank you guys for listening and watching, and take care.